Indonesia Air Asia Flight 8501 was a scheduled international passenger flight operated by Indonesia Air Asia from Surabaya, Java, Indonesia, to Singapore. On the 28th of December 2014, the Airbus A320 flying the route crashed into the Java Sea, killing all 162 of the people on board. When search operations ended in March 2015, only 116 bodies had been recovered. This is the first crash and only fatal accident involving Air Asia. In December 2015, the Indonesian National Transportation Safety Committee released a report concluding that a non-critical malfunction in the rudder control system prompted the captain to perform a non-standard reset of the onboard flight control computers. Control of the aircraft was subsequently lost, resulting in a stall and uncontrolled descent into the sea. Miscommunication between the two pilots was cited as a contributing factor. Indonesia Air Asia Flight 8501 was a scheduled flight from Java, Indonesia, to Singapore on Sunday, the 28th of December, 2014. It was scheduled to depart Juanda International Airport at 5:20 Western Indonesian Time and arrive at Singapore Changi Airport at 8:30 Singapore Standard Time. PKXC took off at 5:35 and reached its cruising altitude at flight level 320 at 32,000 feet. 14 minutes later, it joined air route M635, heading northwest out over the western Java Sea. The plane was in contact with Jakarta Air Traffic Control. The flight was normal until 6 o'clock, when an electronic centralized aircraft monitor ECAM memo was displayed, along with a master caution light to indicate a fault with the rudder limiter system. Captain Irianto read the actions for fixing this failure and rebooted the aircraft's to flight augmentation computers, FACs. The same fault recurred at 6:09, and the captain fixed it in the same way. At 6:11, the pilots turned 15 degrees to the left to avoid inclement weather and contacted Jakarta ATC to request a climb to FL 380 at 38,000 feet for the same reason. The controller could not give immediate permission for this due to other aircraft in the vicinity, and instructed them to wait. While they were waiting for permission to climb, the rudder limiter problem occurred for a third time, and for the third time, the captain reset the FAQ computers. When the memo displayed for the fourth time, Captain Irianto, annoyed by the recurring problem and trying to find another way to fix it, decided to reset the FAC circuit breakers. He had previously seen this action being performed by a ground engineer and believed that it was acceptable to do so in flight. The FAC circuit breakers were reset at 6:16, with immediate consequences, as this action not only reset the FAQ computers but also disconnected the autopilot and auto throttle, and the flight control law changed from normal to alternate. It allowed the aircraft to roll to the left, and by the time First Officer Plessel reacted to this, it was banked at 54 degrees. Plessel, possibly spatially disoriented due to the roll sensation, overcorrected twice, first by making a sharp right bank input and then a sharp left bank input. After that, at 6:17, Plessel made a nose-up input on his side stick, causing the aircraft to enter a steep climb at a 24-degree nose-up pitch. The captain gave a confusing direction to pull down, which bears an internal contradiction, as pull suggests up, while down means down. In just 54 seconds, the aircraft climbed from 32,000 feet to 38,500 feet, exceeding a climb rate of 10,000 feet per minute, or 50 minutes per second. It then entered a stall at around 6:17, descending at a rate of up to 20,000 feet per minute. The aircraft also began a turn to the left, forming at least one complete circle before disappearing from radar at 6:18. At 6:20, the flight data recorder stopped recording. The CVR stopped recording 1 second later. At 6:20, the aircraft crashed into the Java Sea and was destroyed. All 162 people on board were killed instantly upon impact. Its last recorded position was over the Java Sea, Karamata Strait between the islands of Belitung and Kalimantan. The aircraft crashed in the Java Sea, Karamata Strait between the islands of Belitung and Borneo. The cockpit voice recorder captured multiple warnings, including a stall warning, sounding in the cockpit during the final minutes of the flight. No distress signal was sent from the aircraft. Search and rescue operations were activated by the Indonesia National Search and Rescue Agency Basarnas from the Pangkal Pinang office. Air Asia released details of the 155 passengers, which included 137 adults, 17 children, and 1 infant. The crew consisted of 2 pilots, 4 flight attendants, and an engineer. The passengers on board were mostly Indonesian, and 3 passengers on board originated from South Korea. A few were from the United Kingdom, Singapore, and Malaysia. Captain Irianto, age 53, an Indonesian national, had a total of 20,537 flying hours, of which 4,687 hours were on the Airbus A320. The captain began his career with the Indonesian Air Force, graduating from pilot school in 1983 and previously flying fighter jet aircraft. He took early retirement from the Air Force in the mid-1990s to join Merpati Nusantara Airlines, and later worked for Adam Air and Sriwijaya Air before joining Indonesia Air Asia. He had 6,100 flying hours with Indonesia Air Asia. First Officer Remy Emmanuel Plessel, age 46, a French national, had a total of 2,247 flying hours, including 1,367 hours on the Airbus A320. He was originally from Le Marigot, Martinique, and had studied and worked as an engineer in Paris. At 44, he left his previous job to fulfill a childhood dream of becoming a pilot. Indonesia Air Asia was the first airline he had worked for. He was living in Indonesia. 41 people who were on board the Air Asia flight were members of a single church congregation in Surabaya named Jiraya Mawar Sharon. Most were families with young children traveling to Singapore for a New Year's holiday. The bodies began to be returned to their families on the 1st of January 2015. At that time, the East Java Regional Police Department's disaster victim identification commissioner stated that the victims were identified by the means of post-mortem results, thumbprints, and their personal belongings. Air Asia offered $32,000 to each of the grieving family members of the victims of the accident as initial compensation from an overall part of compensation. David Dejikasuma, who had 7 family members on the flight, received the amount for each family member he lost. The events leading to the crash were investigated by Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee. Assistance was provided by Australia, France, Singapore, and Malaysia. Data from the flight data recorder was downloaded, although the aircraft's route took it through areas of cloud that extended from 12,000 feet up to 44,000 feet. FDR data showed that weather was not a factor in the accident. 124 minutes of cockpit dialogue was successfully extracted from the cockpit voice recorder. The sound of many alarms from the flight system can be heard in the final minutes, almost drowning out the voices of the pilots. The investigators ruled out a terrorist attack as the cause, and then examined the possibility of human error or aircraft malfunction. Acting Director of Air Transportation, Joko Morjadmo, clearly stated that the investigation of the flight route and the investigation of the crash itself are separate. Morjadmajo said that Air Asia is clearly wrong because they didn't fly at a time and schedule that was already determined. Both Singapore's Civil Aviation Authority and the Changi Airport Group stated that Air Asia was allowed daily flights between Surabaya and Singapore. Tatang Kuniadi, head of Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee, stated that sabotage was ruled out as a cause of the accident by the black boxers, and a preliminary report was supposedly submitted to the International Civil Aviation Organization by early February. After studying the wreckage of the Airbus A320-216, as well as the 2 black boxes and the cockpit recorder, Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee issued a report with their conclusions from the investigation on the 1st of December 2015. The report stated that the sequence of events that led to the crash started with a malfunction in 2 of the plane's rudder travel limiter units. A tiny soldered electrical connection in the plane's RTLU was found to be cracked, likely for over a year, causing it to intermittently send amber master caution warnings to the electronic centralized aircraft monitor ECAM, with the plane's maintenance records showing that the RTLU warning had been sent 23 times over the previous year, but was always solved and never further investigated, which could have addressed the underlying electrical problem by resetting the RTLU system. On this flight, the RTLU issue sent an amber caution warning for different times, and the first 3 times that the ECAM system gave the warning, Auto-Flight Rudder Travel Limiter System, the pilot in command followed the ECAM instructions, toggling the flight augmentation computer 1 and 2 buttons on the cockpit's overhead panel to off and then on. This procedure did clear the amber master caution warnings for each of those first 3 warnings. Specifics in the report indicate that French First Officer Remy Emmanuel Plessel was at the controls just before the stall warning sounded in the cockpit, indicating that the jet had lost lift. Investigators also found that, just moments earlier, on the fourth occurrence of the RTLU warning during the flight, the captain chose to ignore the procedure advised by the ECAM instructions, and, instead, left his seat and reset the circuit breaker of the entire FAQ, unintentionally disengaging multiple flight control systems, which would have to be turned on by the pilots after the circuit breakers are reset. Investigators also found that, just moments earlier, on the fourth occurrence of the RTLU warning during the flight, the captain chose to ignore the procedure advised by the ECAM instructions, and, instead, left his seat and reset the circuit breaker of the entire FAQ, unintentionally disengaging multiple flight control systems, which would have to be turned on by the pilots after the circuit breakers are reset. This circuit breaker is not on the list of circuit breakers that are allowed to be reset in flight, and disabling both phases placed the aircraft in alternate law mode, disengaging the autopilot and stopping the automatic stall protection and bank angle protection. The FAQ is the part of the fly-by-wire system in a 320 aircraft responsible for controlling flight surfaces, including the rudder. Without the FAC's computerized flight augmentation, pilots would have to rely on manual flying skills that are often stretched during a sudden airborne emergency. When the crew was required to fly the Airbus A320 manually, there was an unexplained 9-second delay between the start of the roll and either pilot attempting to take control. After 9 seconds, the aircraft was banking at a 54-degree angle. The rudder had deflected 2 degrees to the left, causing the aircraft to roll. Subsequent flight crew actions resulted in the aircraft entering a prolonged stall, from which they were unable to recover. The report did not specifically conclude that pilot error caused the crash, while detailing the chain of events leading to the loss of Flight 8501. One of the investigators, the NTSC's NERC, referred to an apparent miscommunication between the pilots, based on the recordings on the cockpit voice recorder, and said that the malfunction should not have led to a total loss of control had they followed the recommended procedure. The example of miscommunication between the pilots was when the plane was in a critical stalling condition. The co-pilot misunderstood the captain's command pull-down. Instead of pushing the airplane's nose down, pushing forward on the stick to regain speed and escape the stall, he pulled the stick back, which would have ordered the aircraft to pitch up, deepening the stall. Because the captain was also pushing the stick forward, and because Airbus has a dual-input system, the two stick inputs cancelled each other out, which led to the plane remaining in a stall condition until the end of the black box recording. On the 3rd of December 2015, Indonesia's Air Transportation Director General Suprasetyo said that the National Safety Transportation Committee had provided recommendations as to tightened controls on aircraft maintenance and flight crew competence. He added that the government had implemented a series of corrective actions as a preventive measure so that the same accident will not happen again in the future. The crash of Indonesia Air Asia Flight 8501 was not caused by a single failure, but by a series of small mistakes that built up to something irreversible. It was a chain reaction, part technical, part human. The flight crew's response to a recurring rudder limiter fault showed how critical system understanding is. When the flight augmentation computers were reset mid-air, it unintentionally disconnected the autopilot and autothrottle, changing the aircraft's flight law and leaving the pilots manually controlling a jet in unstable conditions. The crew's reaction revealed gaps in manual flying training under high-stress conditions. When automation failed, the pilots struggled to recognize and recover from a stall, a reminder that no matter how advanced the aircraft, the pilot's instinct and skill must remain sharp. Communication between the captain and first officer broke down at a critical moment. The absence of clear coordination and role distribution turned confusion into chaos. In aviation, and in life, teamwork saves lives. Silence, hesitation, and pride can be deadly. The rudder limiter problem had occurred multiple times before the crash. Repeated technical issues must never be normalized. When we stop questioning recurring faults, we invite disaster. Flight 8501 was another reminder that modern pilots often depend too heavily on automation. But when systems fail, it's manual skill, not technology, that determines survival. Aviation safety is built on tragedy. Every accident leaves behind lessons written in data, wreckage, and heartbreak. Air Asia Flight 8501 taught the world that understanding your machine, trusting your co-pilot, and never losing focus in chaos are not just flight rules, they're survival rules. This was the story of Indonesia Air Asia Flight 8501, A reminder that behind every number lies a human story. And behind every tragedy, a lesson that keeps us flying safer. If you found this story meaningful, make sure to subscribe to Black Box, where every flight has a story. And every story teaches us something new about courage, failure, and the pursuit of safety in the skies.